Thank you very much, Liz. That was very generous of you, and it was also greatly appreciated that you didn't share with the audience the real reason that you got me here. You wrote me that letter saying that you had pictures of me trying to get into a strip joint when I was 18 years old and an acting student coming to the University of Minnesota. I always feel like I'm returning home when I come back to the Twin Cities. This is the ancestral home of my mother's family. She's 92 years old, and I was driving in today and I said, what was the address on Portland Avenue? That's all I had to say to her. It's where her grandmother lived, and her mother was raised at the turn of the last century. She said 3517. I said, I'll drive by and take a picture and send it to you, Mother. Obviously, the neighborhood has changed a little bit since then. But it was very touching, and it was, I must say, very evocative for me to stop and think about my grandmother and my grandfather courting there when my grandmother was kind of a bon vivant in Minneapolis, and my grandfather took her back out to the northern prairie of South Dakota, where they had a very difficult but nonetheless very rich life. And let me just also say to all of you who are here tonight that in your chosen career, our common passion of journalism, you're well ahead of me. I tried twice to get a job in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and failed both times. And because I couldn't get a job in Minneapolis or St. Paul, I was left to wander in that wilderness, reserved for professional journalists who could not make it in the Twin Cities. And I've often wondered what may have happened to me if I could only have gotten a job in Minneapolis or St. Paul. My closest connection, obviously, did come when I carried the Minneapolis Tribune on Sundays, and for a while as a daily in a small town on the Missouri River in South Dakota where they were building the Fort Randall Dam. I did that beginning in 1953, just about the time they were beginning the Franken-Coleman recount. And as I remember, when I began carrying the Minneapolis Tribune, they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of Sid Hartman's column. Just as I I'm very pleased to be with you tonight. I've had a kind of active week in a lot of ways, both in New York, and then last night I flew to Tulsa to do a benefit for my wife's uncle, who's been a very important part of the medical community there. Came up this morning to the Mayo Clinic, where I've had the very good fortune of being appointed to the Board of Trustees about a year ago and did something there, and now I'm here tonight. And this is a very important speech for me, but it may not be the most challenging one that I have this week, because on Saturday morning, I'm delivering the commencement address at Fordham University in New York. And what I always do when I make a commencement address is go back and peruse the student newspaper, kind of the week before the speech, to see what the students were saying about the selection of their commencement speaker. When I did that at Stanford last year, a young woman said, "Tom Brokaw, that's like having adult radio as your speaker." So this year, I went to the Fordham newspaper site, and people were a little more generous, saying, well, yeah, I think he's a distinguished journalist, and it's probably a good idea to have him, but most of us were hoping that we would have Stephen Colbert as our speaker. So on Saturday morning, I'm prepared to say, and I have cleared this with Stephen, I am prepared to say that Stephen really wanted to be with them for their commencement ceremonies, but every Saturday he's in rehab, so he can't be there. And then as luck would have it, on Sunday morning, I'm going to William and Mary to deliver the commencement address at the alma mater of my very good friend Jon Stewart. And Jon Stewart gave a commencement address at William and Mary 4 years ago that is still one of the most popular of all the speeches that appear on YouTube. John and I were together earlier this week doing a big benefit in New York for something called the Robin Hood Foundation, which is an amazing organization in terms of helping people who are in poverty and early childhood development needs and unemployment and especially education. So I pulled his speech, and I thought before I began my serious remarks tonight, I would share with you what I'm up against. on Sunday morning. This is how John concluded his speech at his alma mater 4 years ago. I was in New York on 9/11 when the towers came down. I lived 14 blocks from the Twin Towers, and when they came down, I thought the world had ended. And I remember walking around in a daze for weeks, and Mayor Giuliani had said to the city, "You've got to get back to normal. We've got to show that things can change and get back to what they were." And one day I was coming out of my building, and on my stoop was a man who was crouched over, and he appeared to be in deep thought. And as I got closer to him, I realized he was playing with himself. And that's when I thought, you know, we're gonna be okay. I called John on the trip here from Rochester this afternoon, and I said, I'm going to need something besides that for Sunday morning, John. Please help me out. I'm going to share a few thoughts with you tonight, and then I'm going to take some questions. I may not have any answers, but I'm willing to take the questions. And I thought I would begin by saying we're all in this together. We all have a common commitment to this great calling of journalism, which has been around as long as cavemen have been telling stories about what has been going on in their neighborhood. And it is an essential part of any free people anywhere, and even those who are oppressed really rely on journalists to shine a light on what is done in society and what is being done to people everywhere. I want to begin by sharing with you some remarks I made a few years ago at the Kennedy School. I was privileged to be Theodore White Lecturer on Journalism in America. This was 9 years ago. And I said there was a time in America not so long ago when darkness came in the early evening, there were really only two planets in the sky in terms of broadcasting. There was the Chet Huntley and David Brinkley planet and the Walter Cronkite planet, all across the Republic. Families gathered ritualistic, 6:30 in the East, 5:30 in the Central Time Zone, to watch either Chet and David or Walter Cronkite, to share an evening meal and the experience of first just 15 minutes and then a half hour of reporting. And it's hard for me to describe to those of you who are a good deal younger than I am how magical that was in our lives in this country. I'd grown up in working class communities and small towns in South Dakota, a family of very modest means, but suddenly we had a television set in the corner of our living room that would transport us around the world through these remarkable journalists. When my father got home at the end of his shift as a construction foreman, he would pick up the afternoon newspaper. And on Sunday mornings, we'd await the arrival of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune so that I could deliver it and that we could pour through it. And on many occasions in our family, it was a vicarious experience because there were no Daytons in Vickstown, South Dakota. I was part of that audience. I was an irrepressible and ambitious teenager in the small towns of the Great Plains. My nose, metaphorically, was pressed up against the glass of this magical view of the world well beyond my ordinary surroundings. It was in so many ways a transforming experience and an expansion of the universe occupied only by working class families, but by millions of others across the television landscape. We were witness in our homes in ways that we had never been before to the events that defined our times. Conventions and elections, scandals and triumphs, disasters and advances, great social causes, the civil rights movement, anti-war protest. They were beamed directly into our living rooms. I remember so vividly